Dr. Pragya Tripathi is presently working as an assistant professor, Department of Sociology at Dugra Narayana PG College affiliated to Kanpur. She is also working on a short-term project funded by C.N. Raman Minor Project. She has graduated from Lady Sri Ram College in the year 2012 and Master in Sociology from GNU in the year 2014 and MPhil from Delhi in School of Economics in the year 2016. And she has completed her PhD in the year 2022. In addition, she has participated and presented multiple papers at national and international conferences, and she also published papers on issues of agrarian distress, feminization of agriculture, gender, etc. We are honored to have Dr. Pragya Tripathi share his valuable insight and knowledge with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pragya Tripathi. Thank you, everyone.
Madam Dr. Pragya Tripathi, time is yours. You can start your presentation, madam.
Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, madam.
Okay.
Please continue.
I would like to share my screen.
Yes, please.
Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. Especially, I would like to thank all the organizers, the coordinators of RC25, and everyone who has been part of this journey. For the 10th research methodology course, I think we've come a long way, and such research courses are very, very much important. And today we'll actually be dealing with why is it important specifically in context to Indian research and writing. So my topic for the present day is challenges in Indian research and writing. I would not only be talking about the challenges, rather I would also be talking about the mitigation and how can we help ourselves, as researchers in the entire process of researching and writing. Because I have been part of this, I know that it is completely an overwhelming process. Once you start researching as a PhD scholar or even after that. So the struggles are never ending for an academician. And I would try to, sort of mitigate some of those howsoever I've come forward in this journey. So starting from here, one second. One second, it's not. Yeah, so my first question is, are we trained in research? And if we are trained in research, are we really trained in academic writing? And both the things are very much different and very much interconnected. I would request the admin to once please remove me. I'll add myself again because I don't know if there's some issue with sharing.
Ma'am, what happened, ma'am? You can start, ma'am.
No, I'm just stuck. Yeah, I will not increase my screen size. Is it visible?
No. Dr. Pragya,
Yeah.
are you not able to move the slides ahead? What is the
Yeah.
issue?
Yes.
Don't worry. You do one thing, that in the main screen on the left hand side, you will see the small slides over there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all your slides. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll just
Now,
do
now,
that.
now you click on the second screen.
Yeah. Because when I'm continuously doing it, there's some issue. So
Don't-
it's visible now to everybody?
Yes. No. One
Yes, yes.
second.
Ma'am.
It is visible.
Okay.
Now, 1 second. Just are we trained in research? Just try to move the second slide also. Just click on the second slide. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does it work?
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you can go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So the first problem that we as researchers face is the rise of predatory publishing. This is not only part of the research, but also our writing. We may write very well, we may research very well, but what eventually happens is that we have a overwhelming form of predatory publishing that impacts our research work a lot. So in 2018, there was a survey conducted that on a lot of scientific articles, and they said that around 300 predatory journals operate in India. They not only operate, they are so exploitative that they charge hefty amount of fees. So UGC in 2019, it reduced the list to 800, the white list of journals. And now, for instance, not just in social science, but also in natural science, for instance, in cancer and cardiovascular diseases, we find that clinical trials are not done, which is not only harmful for social research, but also for the health of the general population. Moving on, it has been suggested that 30% of Indian PhD students had either published due to the ease of getting published. They published in predatory journals because they thought that it is easier to publish, it is more accessible. Finding good publication is also a huge problem for researchers. So 50% of Indian researchers lack the knowledge to identify predatory journals. What are predatory journals? How do we identify them? Because a lot of journals, it has happened with me as well. A lot of journals come back to you and, they pressurize you. They suggest to publish in the new coming semester. So in 2017 survey of Indian researchers, 45% admitted that they had trouble distinguishing between legitimate and predatory journals. And we will talk about it later. How do we distinguish it? In fact, a researcher at a very small Indian university in a tier 3 and tier 2 city, he paid around 80,000 and later it was delisted by UGC. Now, how do we resolve that? Firstly, UGC, when it delisted a lot of academic journals which were predatory, there was 25% decrease in such journals. And there was a lot of awareness. There has to be a lot of awareness regarding this amongst the scholars. Along with that, what we can do is national research repositories we can create, like India RXV, because these repositories, what they do is they collect a data of all these journals and hand it over. So we need such kind of repositories. We need to also promote trusted open access journals like Biomed, PLOS, Frontiers, and these open access journals, once you read them, once you understand them and how do they function, what is their submission format, it becomes much more easier to process it. We also need to collaborate with indexing bodies like Scopus and Clarivate. For instance, China does that. It collaborates with Scopus and Web of Science to produce a legitimate list of journals in which academicians can publish. So we need that kind of, collaboration. Moving on, how can we identify? So firstly, we need to look at the publisher's website. How valid and how legitimate does it look? Secondly, we need to verify the journal. If it is a member of DOAJ, COPE or STM, where does it fall? And definitely it's, the contact information. We need to call them, we need to ask them, we need to query them about, and check its list and Scopus index as well. Check up the members of the editorial board, and that makes a lot of sense because you'll find people, only credible people in credible journals. So that is very, very important. You need to look into the editorial board, and all this research needs to be done at our level, individual level, before we submit our, research, which is very, very valuable to us. Then bring a critical eye to their peer review process and publication schedule. So most of the times what happens in predatory journals, they would allow you to submit your paper without any peer review process, and it does not take any time. And sometimes they would also even publish in a day or two. The process looks very easier and catchy, but it has a lot of impact because most of these journals are delisted in Scopus and by UGC. So browse previous issues of the journal. What kind of articles has been written? Does it make sense to you in terms of good research? Only then you need to kind of accept publication. And most importantly, if they are selling it out, if they're asking you for money, that is a huge problem, and you must question the entire process. So how do we select a journal? Most importantly, we need to specify our field. Once you start searching for a good journal where you can publish, for instance, if you're working on labor, so you need to search journals that are actually publishing in labor studies. Or if you're working in economics, then what are the journals? Make a list of it. Then there are finders also for journals like Scopus, and these journals, these finders basically help you to connect with valid, legitimate journals where you can publish your work. Look for the impact factor, which has to be at least 2.0, right? It should not be below that, and it should not be fake as well. Sometimes fake impact numbers are also given over there. And it has to be indexed in Scopus or Web of Science. This is a very clear criteria. You do not have to ask anybody. Rather, you can do this work on your own self. Then review their submission guidelines. Choose the journals that actually accept papers around 6,000 words and, follow the APA citation style, which is primarily for humanities and social science background students. And 6,000 words because, when you submit a paper of 6,000 words, it makes sense. Lesser than that, it makes a scholarly paper kind of a thing. So you need to also check how many numbers, the words are allowed. What is the citation style? A lot of journals also ask you to submit an abstract for it. So you have to be very, very aware of their submission process, and it varies from journal to journal. And you have to cater to the journal, the kind of submission it is asking. Then you have to upload it and track the process through peer review. And it is a very smooth, it is not a smooth process, but it is a very, very transparent process. And you have to be very, very patient for these journals because good journals do take time, from a year or two. And then so the first issue that we as Indian researchers face is the rise of predatory journals, and there are a lot of mechanisms through which we can resolve that. The second most interesting and the problematic thing, and which we have in India, is poor scientific training and research methodology. Even in very, very good universities, what we find is that we do not undergo the proper scientific training. What does scientific training mean? Scientific training means, it does not mean just providing you with a theoretical, background of what research is, what kind of methodology should be used, but rather actually a very practical kind of an understanding. Mostly what happens is we are given a training in qualitative research. We will have an idea, but what we lag behind is quantitative. So conferences and workshops like these will actually fill that gap, and we must make an effort to join such kind of workshops because this is actually the need of the hour. Then, so for instance, how do we formulate a hypothesis? What is a hypothesis? We know that, in the theoretical sense, but how do we actually formulate the hypothesis of our research study? Our area of study is a question. If we are actually doing an experimental design, which is primarily a quantitative analysis, how do we design that? How do we collect the data? I mean, once you have a theoretical knowledge, going into the field and collecting the data is a major trouble. How do we collect it? What kind of respondents should we, have? How do we connect with the respondents? And what kind of data collection is suitable to our kind of work? Then the proper survey, what kind of survey are we, and what is the sample size? These very, very minute things, but most of the time we lack this idea. What is a representative sample? What kind of statistical method should we use? There are multiple statistical methods. So especially in statistical analysis, I personally feel that when you are doing research, even in social science, you lack that, and we need to bridge that gap. So for instance, if a researcher is working on the data on income distribution, but if he or she has no idea what is regression analysis or multivariate analysis, which I'm sure in previous days you must have gone through, these, if you do not have an idea of these advanced statistical tools, you will actually fall behind, because in international forum, these kinds of analysis are very much given from the very start. Now, these are the problems that we keep facing. I will also talk about solutions, but things like we should make an effort to know and understand what is SPSS, R, and Stata. Stata is actually a very advanced level, but still, depending upon your core area of interest. For instance, if you are an environmental scientist, you need to know about these models, and how do we calculate and modify these climate data is also important. Then how do we formulate hypothesis? Then how do we test it? Now, hypothesis building is important, and we need to have the variables, like, what is the dependent variable in our hypothesis and what is the independent variable. And that actually will make your, the writing and also your research much more credible and much more scientific, because these variables are something that actually determine what you're actually trying to get at. What is your research problem? What is the analysis and what is the conclusion that you want to get at? Then ethical standards is something that we are always told. I'm sure a lot of us know that there has to be an informed consent when you go into the field. You must ensure confidentiality that of the respondents. These are very minor things, but we sometimes forget. So this is the kind of training that we need. And so even we do not have an idea that even in qualitative research, there are softwares like NVivo, and this actually helps you codify and bring thematic representation in your qualitative research, whereas Stata and R is for quantitative research. So if you want to work through qualitative research, this kind of a software is very, very important, and we must have an idea of it. Now, how do we address it? We need certain methodology courses. Definitely workshops like these, never fail to attend them. Make it a point that whenever you get an opportunity, it's actually an opportunity to attend these workshops, do attend them. Then courses are also offered by institutes like Harvard and MIT, and these are online courses which one may try and attend them. Specialized methodology courses they provide. For instance, if you are a student from economics, they will give you a methodology course depending upon that. For instance, in econometrics. And if you're an anthropologist, they will help you to understand what ethnography is, right? Even and then we should also have exchange programs. Now, these exchange programs are through institutions as well as at personal level. You as a researcher can attend them. So there are exchange, for instance, Japan is a very interesting policy where the Tokyo University encourages their PhD students to spend a part of their time in US. Now, you can do that at your individual level, as well as you can collaborate with your university to kind of help you with that. In addition to this, what I would suggest, you should also try and get in touch with the conferences which are related to your themes. For instance, if you're working on gender, so try and search what conferences are there running on this theme. Or if you're working on labor, try and attend conferences which are only working on labor, because that kind of helps you to build a network with people who are actually working in a very competitive zone, and they're working on ideas which are very much relevant for you, and will also help you how you can work in this regard in future. And there are certification courses that all these, University of Toronto offers. One can join that. In fact, there are open access and research transparency. For instance, open science practices. We should have that to store the data. So these are the suggestions that at institutional level, what can we do? Now, there are certain books. Definitely start with books. Library is very, very important, you know, when you're also dealing with research methodology. So these are certain books that one could read. The craft of research is very nice. So these are the books that one can approach before starting methodology. Online courses are there by Coursera and edX. And these are specific courses, how to do research for essay writing, quantitative research methods, then principles of research methodology by Harvard University. This is on edX. Then you have qualitative research methods, workshops and training programs such like this. And ISI also holds that but this is only for statisticians and people from economics background. Then there are specific journals and articles. Sometimes, you know, we get so lost in the ocean of entire, you know, the kind of knowledge we have on internet that we get lost. So you should, if you're really interested to understand what is research methodology, apart from books, what you can do is cater to certain journals and articles of research methodology. Like one such as Journal of Mixed Methods Research, you know, that integrates how qualitative and quantitative research are done. Then you have sociological methods and research that actually talks about social science research. So one must really go through these journals and try to read them. Then these are the softwares that I've been talking about. Then these are the academic conferences.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am.
Hello, good evening.
Ma'am, very sorry to interrupt you now. Actually, you are highly informative and too fast. So our request is please share your PPT at the last in the group. It will be very helpful for us.
Share your PPT at the last.
Yes, after the session today itself, if you share the PPT, it will be very helpful for us.
Okay, I share the PPT later on. That's what you're saying.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay,
Because
that's
actually you are so fast and all the informations are very much actually like new to us. We are very much interested towards it. So please, ma'am, thank you.
You could have done this on chat as well, you know, rather than stopping here. Anyways, thank you. Okay, moving on. Now online research communities and forums are also there. You would know about ResearchGate. I'll try and go slower. Then you have academia on which you can work. These are the journals that you can, library journals that you can really work on. JSTOR and ProQuest. ProQuest definitely has dissertations and thesis and research methodology papers. Now I will not go about the challenges. Definitely there is a lack of funding in our R&D. Just 0.03% is for social science research. Moving on, I will skip this. And yeah, so funding models, what models can we have? Now, apart from having JRF, SRF, and, you know, NET, what we can do. For instance, there are private institutions that actually help in funding. For instance, Infosys, but that does for engineering and technology. For us, for social sciences, for instance, Azim Premji University, it offers a good funding program that one can see. Tata Trust, if you're working in the field of, now field is very important if you're working in social sector related to education or healthcare or rural development, then Tata Trust is one thing. If you're working in humanities and social sciences or STEM, Fulbright, Nehru fellowships also help you to work in your research. But definitely when you're applying for these institutions, your proposal has to be very, very up to mark. Then you have the DAG research grants that Germany gives you for conducting research in Germany by Indian students. Again, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, then you have Gates Foundation, crowdfunding platforms are also there. These are the sources that one can cater to for funding. I will give you the PPT as suggested. Now, this is how you can actually get hold of the funding issue. Now, very, very important issue that we face is the language barrier. Now, a lot of times our papers and our research work gets rejected from major journals only because our vocabulary and our language is not systematic, not clear, being in competition, because definitely English is not our first language. But how do we solve that? So whether we take it or not, language is one of the major barriers when we are submitting our, papers. very, very important thing that I believe is to read. Read a lot. Read a lot on your field, whatever the literature is. Keep reading because that actually helps you build the vocabulary of academia. Okay. Then,
Law.
uh,
Yeah.
then you need to write in simple language. Do not get petrified by what kind of language should I start with. Start with a very simple language. It has to be concise, precise. Write it in a form that you're addressing it to somebody who doesn't know anything, and then you can modify that. uh, you can have your own peer editing system. If you're good at vernacular language but not in English, what we can do in our own university, we can have a peer group. Then so again, tools like Grammarly and Hemingway app, they also help. Then there are softwares like these, and then papers, definitely, as I suggested. And what a lot of students also, when I talk to them, they do is first they write in their native language, because that is your first language. You can write in that, because once you write in that, your thoughts are clear. Once your thoughts are clear, you know what you're trying to say, and then building that up in English becomes somewhat easier. So you can do that. There are also regional journals. For instance, Journal of the Andhra Pradesh Academy of Sciences, Tamil Nadu Science Congress, or Gujarat Sociological Society that actually cater to regional work and regional language. So you can publish here also. Then for academic resources, these are the resources I would suggest you to go through it once you have time. Definitely, Shodh Ganga is one thing. How do we access these resources is also another trouble, because if you're not affiliated to any university, for instance, if you're teaching in a college like me, or if you're doing an independent research, you would not have access to university resources. Now, what do? But there are a lot of open resources that one can access. So there are open access journals like PLOS and PubMed also, in which social science work is published. Then you have eShodh Ganga. Then you have National Digital Library of India. These are the sources that one can refer to. Google Scholar is one of my favorite, because you get a lot of resource here, just typing it down. And then, yeah, thesis and dissertation database also you can get from ProQuest Dissertation, which has global thesis. You have MOOC and educational platforms like Coursera and edX and FutureLearn. How do we access library? So you have WorldCat, National Library of India. These are the sources that one can. And academia.edu, you can actually form a profile there, and have access to a lot of articles that people freely share there. ResearchGate is another, to have your profile there, and then you can access a lot of resources which are freely available. Now, I've talked about what is research and what are the challenges. Mostly, I'm trying to, discuss what is the solution of our challenges. So the first part of our, although both are very much interconnected, but the first part of my session was about research. How do we research it, and what are the problems, and how do we mitigate it? Now, in my second half, I would actually talk about uh, how do we mitigate the issue of writing, right? How do we mitigate the issue of writing? By giving you a case study. I'm not going to give you a theoretical, background of how to write, rather through a case study of informal work. Suppose somebody is working on informal sector. How do we form an introduction? The first issue that comes is forming an introduction. So if you are dealing with the introduction, you have to divide that introduction completely in 4-5 formats again. For instance, you have to start with something interesting. It could also be dull. I'm not suggesting that what I'm saying is something, that you have to follow. But for instance, you can start with the stats that nearly 70% of the world's population relies on informal employment, yet little attention has been given to the policies governing this sector. Makes sense? Okay. It shows that what you're trying to reach out here is informal employment. And you have also said that where does it lag? We do not have policies that govern this sector, right? Or you can start with a very simple sentence also, trying to explain what is informal sector. Or you can start with, if you're working in India, make a context within and reference within India, that within India, informal sector comprises of all these categories, or these numbers are there. So you can start with a question mark, or you can start with a stats, or you can start with a very simple sentence as well. That's not issue. Then moving on, you should provide a background information. Secondly, now what is the topic? Why is it important? Now everybody wants to know, why are you researching about it? Why are you writing about it? And what is the significance of your research, which is very, very important. So then you go on to say that it plays a crucial role in global economy, and especially in a developing country, because if you're working in India, you have to connect not just informal economy with the wider economy, but also within it developing, within a country like India, which is developing. So despite this, much of the discourse has focused on formal labor regulation. Now, what is the gap? That we are still not talking about informal sector, that how vulnerable it is. On first, we start the sentence about informal sector. Moving on, we are actually talking about what is the gap, right? And then you have to, in the third segment, you have to define the research problem or the research question. What is the research problem that you are trying to deal with? So clearly state the problem or question that you want to address. For instance, this paper seeks to explore how informal labor is connected between developed and developing nations, and what factors contribute to the ongoing disparities in worker protections. So now you have made it clear that what you're trying to do is not just study informal labor in developing country, but you're trying to make a connection between the developed and the developing nation. Then after defining your research problem, what you can do, you can talk about the importance of your research. Why your research is important. That is something that everybody wants to know, because a lot of work has been done in every field. So you can start with understanding these connections is vital for whom, for the policymakers as well as for the sociologists when you are dealing with labor rights or globalization. So then you have to give an importance. Why is it important? Within introduction, then you move on to the fifth step. That step is you talk about research objective and hypothesis. Hypothesis only if it is relevant for your paper. If it is very qualitative study purely, you may not need it. But for what is your research objective? What do you want to come out with? For instance, here in this study, if the person wants to examine the economic impact of informal labor on both developed and developing nations, that person has made it clear that the objective is this. I want to study what is the impact of informal labor in both the states, like the developing and the developed. And then identify strategies for improving the labor conditions globally. How do we improve the labor conditions globally? That is another objective of my paper. Okay. Then outline the structure of the paper. For instance, after doing all this, you have to tell that in the first section, I'm going to review the literature based on informal labor and globalization, or maybe the interconnection you want to draw between informal labor and poverty, whatever you want to do, or informal labor and gender. You have to explain that your literature wants to deal with this issue. In section 3, I want to talk about methodology. In section 4, I want to discuss the findings. This way, you have to give a structure in the introduction. Finally, next, when we are talking about literature review, the first step is to define your research topic that you have already done. Search for relevant literature. Now there would be a lot. There would be a lot of literature on informal labor, but what do you want to search? Do you want to search an interconnection between informal labor and poverty? Take your time and do on that. Okay. You have to also build a lot of theory. You have to come up with whatever theoretical frameworks are there with respect to informal labor, right? And talk about that. Then you have to also look at the empirical studies. What studies have been conducted in various fields? For instance, BD workers who are they, and what impact do they have, the garment industry, people who are involved in it, then review it. For instance, you'll come up with these sources depending upon your research, and then you have to summarize and analyze each source. For instance, you have to talk what Smith in 2015 in his paper has talked about, right? And then you have to give a summary and analyze that, that person is trying to highlight the economic importance of informal labor. But what am I going to do is I'm going to fill that research gap by talking about what? By talking about the social impact, right? Then, so identifying the gaps in the literature is very, very important when you are writing the literature. So research has been explored in terms of economy, but what remains unfulfilled is the social aspect, or how the informal labor is interconnected between the developed and the developing nations. So these are the things that I want to address. Then, and I'm sorry if I'm going too much in detail. Is it okay? So next
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Next is to synthesize the literature. For instance, rather than giving abrupt paragraphs on all the literature, what you can do is interconnect. For instance, you talk about the literature that works on economic benefits of informal labor, and then you talk about the literature that talks about poverty, right? So you have interconnected. So what you are trying to say is that these contrasting views suggest that informal labor's impact may vary significantly across regions, which underscores the need for region-specific policy solutions. Now, this makes sense because you're not trying to bring a global solution, but you're trying to bring a region-specific policy solution by dealing with all this literature that is in front of you. So not just reading, but accurately writing and connecting the literature with each other is very, very important. How do you conclude it? By summarizing, providing the summary of all the literature, and then finally saying that my research will focus on informal labor in developing countries, which is influenced by policies and economic trends in developed nations. And this is how I will try and fill this gap which is there in the research. We've talked about literature review. We've talked about introduction. Moving on to methodology. Now, methodology is also something that we need to specify in various segments, right? Most importantly, and firstly, we'll talk about the problem. Moving on, then we'll talk about how do we describe the research design. We all know that there are 3 types of research designs, that is qualitative, quantitative, and mixed. Now you have to justify. You cannot just say that I'm using quantitative research for this kind of a study, but you have to tell that this approach allows for both statistical examination of labor and in-depth understanding of personal experience and policy effects. And that is the reason that I'm using mixed method. So whatever method you are using, you have to kind of justify it. Then data collection method. For instance, if you're doing quantitative method, data collection, where are you collecting the data from? Is it your primary research? Is it your secondary data that you're talking about? And what are the variables that are there in your data that you have to specify. For qualitative, you have to tell that whether you are taking structured interviews, semi-structured interviews, is it an ethnography, right? Is it a phenomenological study? What kind of a study it is? And then you can talk about, in next, you will talk about the sampling technique. So every research, methodology, and depending upon your research, will actually have a sampling technique, and which will be very specific to you. For instance, if you are, dealing with a kind of research where you may not find the respondents very easily, so you'll have to ensure that you do snowball sampling so that there is an interconnection. You ask somebody questions and you ask if they have connection with people, similar kind of people, and then you connect with them, and this is how snowball sampling works. Then there is random sampling technique where you randomly select a sample size, and the respondents. Now the sample size is also technical. Why? Because in a given population, there is a specific sample size. So for instance, if there is a 10,000 population, there is a specific sample size for that, represent that would actually represent the entire population. Then you have to outline the procedure. For instance, very mundane thing, but very, very important that, when did you take the research from January? How long was it? And then whom do you connect with? For instance, the local labor organization or the workers themselves. So whom did you connect with? Then you have to talk about the tools. Tools, for instance, was it questionnaire? Was it interview? You have to discuss those tools. You may also bring up with few scholars who have talked about these tools and why is it important in such kind of a study, making it more making it more elaborate. Then comes your analysis part. Analysis, definitely for quantitative data, you'll have to use SPSS software or some other software which would actually help you kind of analyze. You have two types of analysis here. For instance, descriptive stats. So descriptive stats will actually give you a description that, okay, these number of people were there and in informal sector. These are the number of female respondents and their education profile. So descriptive stats provides that. Then you have multiple regression analysis, which is also part of it. So analysis would actually also has to be very scientific. That is why we are talking about a scientific research. Then you have qualitative analysis. In qualitative analysis, what happens? We build themes, right? We build themes depending upon our coding. So for instance, if you are in the field and you find certain themes which are relevant for your research, which is relevant and connected to your research question and hypothesis, you use those themes in your analysis. And then ethical considerations, and finally the limitations of your methodology. These are something that is not very difficult. Don't worry, we do not have much slides now. Then moving on, we have results. So if you're building a research paper, you have an introduction, you have the literature review, you have the methodology. And in all these segments, I have suggested that first break them down into certain segments and then start. Similarly, in results also, how do you finally show that these are the results? So firstly, you organize these results depending upon the variables. So for instance, economic contribution of informal labor in developing nations. This is one result. The other result is the effects of outsourcing on informal labor markets. Because what we were trying to do is kind of understand the interconnection between developed and developing nations in terms of informal labor. So this outsourcing is something that connects them. So these are the two results that you have developed. Then you report the data. Reporting the data through statistical analysis, providing values and descriptions. So this is the kind of description that a quantitative result would actually look like. Then for qualitative data, you again develop themes as I suggested. For instance, economic dependency. Then you have lack of formal protections. Then you have social impact of outsourcing. Once you develop these themes, and you have interviewed people, the respondents, you actually quote them. For instance, one of the worker noted that we rely on these jobs, but there are no benefits, no contracts, just day-to-day work. You know that this can come under a theme. What theme can it come under? It can come under lack of formal protection. So this is how you include qualitative data. You can include tables, charts, and figures, both from secondary data or your own primary data. And then you can report certain secondary findings, which may not be relevant for your work, but which can be relevant for somebody who is doing the work, studying your paper. So people also put down certain secondary findings also. Finally, before conclusion, what comes is discussion. How do you discuss it? Discussion will not have so much of quantitative data numbers. It won't have. It will kind of bring certain it will actually bring out the result part in a very academic form. So how do you summarize these findings? How do you address these questions? So for instance, the result indicate that informal labor contributes significantly to GDP in developing countries. right? But is negatively associated with labor protections and economic stability. So what we are trying to say is that informal labor contributes to GDP, but then what is happening because of outsourcing, because of developed nations impact, there is poor labor protection. Okay. And then we interpret these findings, we analyze them through our understanding that, the study goes further by showing that outsourcing amplifies labor's negative effects on worker protection. That, how outsourcing is impacting the labor protection. Then we compare with previous studies. This is how you talk about discussion. So while you are discussing, you have to talk about theories and, the findings of other people and kind of relate it with yours. That, this is the broader scope of the study. What I am doing is broader scope of the study, which included a wide range of industries and countries. Then you have to discuss the implication that, what are the larger implication of my study, and what I'm trying to deal with is actually bring the policy makers into perspective and have some good labor protection laws. Then finally, the conclusion, summarizing it and discussing the implications. And most importantly, in conclusion, you will also talk about your own limitations, so that when you are reading literature of other people, you come up with the limitations of their work. What you do here is actually you come up with the limitations of your own work. That it is based on self-reported data from workers. If it is qualitative study, you're actually interviewing them, you're accepting whatever they are saying. So it may introduce bias. It may not be as objective. It may not be as true as people are saying, but this is my result and this is my idea. Then limitation could also be because of the region, because I'm talking about a very limited region. That could be a limitation. And I cannot generalize it to other developing countries because it has to be context specific. Then suggest future areas of research. That, okay, this kind of a study I've done, maybe a longitudinal study would provide a deeper insight. Maybe examining government policies would also be one angle in which we can understand how labor rights in informal sector needs to be understood. That is your conclusion. And finally, the references. You have to choose the suitable reference. For instance, APA suits the best. Chicago is used in history, business, and fine arts. APA is most acceptable. So according to APA, you have to arrange the titles of the scholars. Then for the book, what you have to do is also there is a criteria. You need to go through these journals and how it has to be written, and your referencing has to be very, very precise while you are submitting your paper. It may be avoided sometimes while you are submitting your dissertation. People may not look into it very much, but when you are submitting it for a research journal, it can very easily get rejected because of references, because it is easier to track it down. So be very clear about it, be very conscious about it, how you are dealing with the references. I think that is it. If you have any questions, do let me know.
हेलो।
हेलो।
नमस्ते मैडम। मेरा नाम जितेंद्र है और मैडम मेरा एक प्रश्न है। मैम मैं ये जानना चाह रहा था, जैसा कि आपने अभी स्टार्टिंग में पहले बताया कि ये जो रिसर्च पेपर पब्लिशिंग के लिए अलग अलग जर्नल जैसे स्कोपस और नेचर वगैरह, तो मैम मैं हिंदी माध्यम का स्टूडेंट हूँ और जैसे कि हम लोग को मैम बताया गया कि जो आपका रिसर्च पेपर है वो पीएचडी के दौरान यूजीसी केयर लिस्टेड जर्नल में होना चाहिए कम से कम। तो मैम बहुत सारे रिसर्च जर्नल ऐसे हैं कि जो यूजीसी केयर लिस्ट में नहीं है, यूजीसी अप्रूव जर्नल लिखते हैं और उनका मैम इम्पैक्ट फैक्टर बहुत हाई है और वो ओपन एक्सेस है, जैसे रिसर्च गेट और बाकी जगह से भी ओपन एक्सेस है। तो मैम यूजीसी के लिस्टेड जर्नल ना मिलने की स्थिति में क्या हम वैसे जर्नल में रिसर्च पेपर पब्लिश कराना ठीक होगा मैम?
आप कह रहे हैं कि अगर यूजीसी केयर लिस्टेड नहीं है तो पीयर रिव्यूड जर्नल की बात कर रहे हैं आप?
हाँ जी मैडम, हाँ जी।
देखिए, सबसे पहले तो कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि यूजीसी केयर लिस्ट में हो। अगर पेयर रिव्यूड भी है तो चलेगा, बट उसकी ऑथेंटिसिटी थोड़ी देखनी पड़ेगी आपको, कितना ऑथेंटिक है। मे बी आपकी पीएचडी में चल जाएगा, बट आगे जाके जब आपको अप्लाई करना होगा एप्लीकेशंस में तो थोड़ी दिक्कत आ सकती है। तो अगर टाइम कम है, समय कम है, बट आपका हिंदी है, तो हिंदी तो वैसे भी थोड़ा सा लिबर्टी ये मिलता है आपको कि आप बहुत सारे जर्नल्स हैं उसके, और अगर उसकी ऑथेंटिक है वो और लेजिटिमेट है, भले ही
जी
उसका बहुत ज्यादा इम्पैक्ट फैक्टर ना हो, तो भी
जी
आप सबमिट कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि आपके आपके में क्या है कि इंटरनेशनल जर्नल्स तो नहीं होंगे, मुझे जैसा लग
जी
रहा है ना।
जी
तो
जी
आप आपके ही जो जर्नल्स हैं जितने अच्छे हैं और रीजनल ही होंगे, और रीजनल, अगर आप यूजीसी केयर लिस्ट में जाकर अपने हिंदी के रीजनल जर्नल्स देखेंगे, तो मुझे लगता है बहुत दिक्कत नहीं होनी चाहिए आपको। ठीक है, तो यूजीसी केयर लिस्ट में ट्राई करिए, नहीं होता है देन यू कैन गो फॉर इट, बहुत लोग कर देते हैं, और तो उसमें कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, बट उसकी थोड़ी सी ऑथेंटिसिटी देखिएगा।
ओके मैम, ओके थैंक यू।
हेलो मैम। हेलो मैम।
हेलो।
मैम, आपने जो स्कॉलरशिप के बारे में बताया सोशल साइंस,
हाँ, थोड़ा सा तेज बोलिएगा, आपकी आवाज।
आप सोशल साइंस की स्कॉलरशिप के बारे में बता रहे थे,
हाँ।
तो उसमें जैसे ऐसा भी कुछ है कि जो आपने बताया था इसमें जनरल और ओबीसी का अलग अलग है?
Excuse me, ma'am.
हेलो।
Ma'am, in this forum, actually, few people are there who doesn't know Hindi. So please, if you share things in English, it will be helpful for us. Thank you.
श्योर श्योर, यस गो अहेड।
हेलो।
somebody was, या हाँ बोलिए।
आप मैम स्कॉलरशिप के बारे में जो आप बता रहे थे वो सोशल साइंस वाला, वो कोई मतलब एनी अदर यूनिवर्सिटी से भी हम अप्लाई कर सकते हैं, या वो यूनिवर्सिटी का ही है जो आप बता रहे थे? वो क्योंकि स्लाइड आगे आ गई थी तो हम देख नहीं पाए वो सही से।
So I think you're asking if scholarships can be applied through universities, right?
जी।
So the thing is, universities, it depends. Individual universities will have their own scholarships individually. But apart from that, what I was trying to show, there are some private institutions also, corporates, that may also provide few funding depending upon your area of research. So sometimes we may also try and contact them and see what is their funding criteria. Okay. And this is the kind of research, thoda sa, we'll have to work on that, that what kind of funding is available from institutions, universities individually. Internationally also there are funding available. If you, for instance, I had shown you about DAAD, where you'll have to go to Germany and work. So I know few Sanskrit scholars, for instance, if you go and work in Germany and you apply through it, you may get an opportunity to work through scholarship.
Yeah, thank you.
Dear participants, is there any query? Okay, then thank you very much, madam. Madam, talk about the challenges in Indian research and writing. Madam mentioned what are the challenges and faced in publication and writings, and also mention how to resolve the issues of predatory publishing. Then she also mentioned the problem faced by the researchers in nowadays, like poor scientific training in RM, lack of practical knowledge, lack of use of advanced statistical methods and tools, use in hypothesis development and testing, and failures to maintain ethical standards. And she also mentioned about how to solve the problems which are faced by the researchers. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, madam. Now I request
Thank you,
Dr.
everyone.
Naurem Sandila, please give your vote of thanks. Please, Madam Sanila, come on the screen.
Thank you, Madam Rosni. A warm and a graceful good evening to all organizing committee, resource person, their participants, and everyone gathered here. It is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks and acknowledge the contribution of those who really hard to make this event possible. I, Naurab Sandila Devi, Assistant Professor, Standard College in Manipur. I would like to thanks to our respected Sir Sanjoy Tiwari, Organizing Secretary, to organize 10 days International Research Methodology Workshop organized very successfully. Next, I extend my sincere thanks to Sir Binit Raj Durai, to the Almighty for making 10 days International Workshop to a grand success. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our respected resource person, Dr. Okram Mukherjee, for sharing your knowledge and experience about online literature database. We get valuable information and communication technology has empowered research scholars to produce, understand, and share the information explosion worldwide. Thank you, sir. Next, I extend my thanks to respected our resource person, Dr. Pragya Tripathi, for sharing knowledge and experience have enlightened us, and we are grateful for your willingness to share your presence, have made a significant impact on our understandings of academic writings. Thank you, Madam. I extend my special thanks to our organizing committee for their unwavering commitment for this international workshop. Lastly but not least, I would like to thank all the participants for making the time to be with us today and helpful us make this event a grand success. Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Sandila. Dear participants, the next remaining 2 days will be hosted by the team of Department of Home Science Standard College. So please join on time. Now we are coming to the end of this program. Thank you all. Vinit sir.